So the principles of the Malaya and Tala Fund for reconstruction, one is resiliency. We know that Typhoon Yolanda is not the last typhoon that will hit, or the last natural disaster that will hit the Philippines. So being resilient for future climatic disasters, and also meeting the 340 kilometer per hour new DepEd standard. The second is greening, introducing environmentally sustainable materials and also reconstruction practices into it, so that also with like solar panels for maintenance and everything. And then community participation. We've held consultations not only with the Maribi community, but also with the San Roque community who are going to be transferred there, talking about what are your concerns with San Roque, what are your concerns with the relocation, what do you think about the design, and having them participate. SEIU, Service Employees International Union, is also going to be funding our Cash for Work program that we're doing, where whenever there's unskilled labor needed for the reconstruction project, they will hire the parents of the students, both in San Roque and in Maribi Elementary School, so that they have a source of livelihood. And lastly, something that's really important when you're rebuilding after Tanauan is what stance are you going to take towards corruption. So we've decided to take a very strong sense of saying no to corruption, which means saying no to SOPs, right? Standard operating procedures, where you grease, where you bribe people. How it works right now with the reconstructing is that there are 3 tiers, there are 3 times where you're supposed to bribe someone before you can go through the construction, through the Department of Education. And these are all things that I learned from folks within the Department of Education and who are contractors who built these schools, who are venting to me about the system. So by the time you actually have the money left, you have only half of your budget that you were supposed to use to build the school. So then that's why, even though there were schools that on paper were 250 kilometer per hour wind resistant, in actuality there were less than 100 kilometer per hour wind resistant. And that's a very painful irony for us, because in Tanauan we use the elementary schools as our evacuation centers, when really they're the poorest built buildings in our entire town. So we're taking a firm stance towards that. This is the design of the school. I'll just briefly show you. So they moved it up. So this is the school before. They moved it up at the request of the community to build it bigger. So now it's 4 classrooms. And one of the classrooms, instead of 2 classrooms before, this is trying to address the problem of increased population at the school. One of the classrooms is going to be a central open informal classroom for kindergarten and 1st grade that's more conducive to social learning for younger kids, based on the studies of the Department of Education in the Philippines. This is a layout of the classroom. I can spend more time showing folks that. So this was the original destroyed classroom, and then they're moving it up here. These are solar panel assisted toilets. Pretty boss.
Were those donated or?
No, this is all being paid by the Malaya and Tala Fund. And this prize is actually, this design is actually a candidate for an award for its use of green technology and its use of community participation in the design. I can go into more detail. Yeah.
Are they building new buildings away from the seashore, or stay at the same location?
For the other schools that I was talking about, they will have to build them away from the seashore, Tita. And then for this school, it is already away from the seashore. It's miles away from the seashore, so it's not within the 50-meter no-build zone, which is why we're hoping to use this school as a model for other future schools for the design. Yeah, I'll probably stop there.
Is your family home destroyed also?
It wasn't as badly destroyed as other places. The roof came off and there was much damage to the 1st floor because of the amount of rains that happened. So all of the ceilings and the dividers between the doors. The water had gone up. When my mom was there, the water, she described it, first the water was here, at your ankles, then in 2 seconds the water was at your stomach, then in 2 seconds the water was above your head. And so luckily my house has a 2nd floor to be able to evacuate to. So they went to the 2nd floor. In my other auntie's house, there was it went higher, the water went higher because we're farther away from the beach, so it went all the way up to the second floor. And so in one case, my cousin had to take the, what's this called, the leg of the table and break the ceiling with the leg of the table. Another case, my uncle had to break the ceiling with his fist in order to get to the roof because the water filled up the entire house. And another case, my auntie who drowned in the house, they weren't able to leave. So switching gears, this is a presentation, or this is the project that my mom is primarily spearheading and that I'm assisting with. It's actually what we're hoping to raise money for while I'm here, that I came back to the U.S. to raise funds for. It's a very important project.
Everybody.
Yeah, I'm looking at you. It's called Tanauan, which means Return to the Sea Tanauan. It's a Restoring the Livelihood for Fisherfolk project. And just to understand why we are having a project specifically towards the fisherfolk, in the Philippines there were over 140,000 fishing boats that were destroyed by Yolanda. Over 500 of them were in Tanauan alone. 60 hectares of fish ponds and fish pens were destroyed, and there are over 1,200 families in Tanauan that are reliant on fishing for their livelihood. So we are focusing on 4 coastal barangays for this project: San Roque, Bagay, Santa Cruz, Cabuinan. This was chosen because of our to be able to build with them, and also because their main source of livelihood in these barangays is fishing. So in keeping with our principle of being participatory and involving the community, we did consultations. So these are the different consultations that we did in the different ones. I'll go through them. But basically what we took away from the consultations is the immense amount of grief that the fisherfolk had, and realizing that there was no way at their age and at the amount of that they had nothing, and there's no way that they would ever be able to recover the losses that they had during Typhoon Yolanda. They would never be able to get back to the place that they were before Yolanda, even if they were very, very poor before Yolanda. I mean, just to give you a perspective, the folks that we were talking to made 100 pesos a day, and on a good day, several hundred pesos a day from fishing. So that's like equivalent to like around $2, right? Yeah. So the conversations also revealed a need for strong fisherfolk associations, for organizing the fisherfolk to be able to work with governmental agencies. An example of this is BFAR, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, came to Tanauan with repair kits. And so with the repair kits, you were supposed to present your unayan, your keel. I think it means keel in English. It's the bottom of your boat. And if you were to present that to this governmental agency, BFAR, they would give you repair kit to build back your boat. In Tanauan, we were completely devastated by Yolanda. We were washed out, so we don't have any keel, any unayan to give to them. So we didn't have any repair kits. So they needed
Nothing to repair.
there's nothing to repair.
Need new boats.
Okay. So having an organized fisherfolk association and being able to organize the complaints of the folks and tell BFAR and other governmental agencies this really does not fit with the needs of our town is something that's important. Also, another thing that came from it, from the consultation, was that a big gap in the relief and rehabilitation assistance has been organizations come in and give a boat, take lots of pictures, everyone's happy, but they don't give nets. And they expect you to be able to provide your own net, right? Which is something that, maybe is fair to assume, especially from here in the West. We think, maybe the nets aren't that expensive. Actually, the wooden boats cost 6,000 pesos and the nets cost 7,000 to 8,500 pesos. So just like there's no possible way you can buy your own boat, there's no possible way you can buy your own nets. So there are places that we would go where you would see all of these beautiful new boats just sitting there, and no one can do anything with them. You can't return to your livelihood without the nets. So that's a big gap that we saw too.
Were they given oars? Sorry. Available?
So I try to hurry up. So this is in Magay. This is one of the coastal barangays. They were all completely washed out. They lost every single one of their boats and nets, and also all of their homes. There's only 2 houses still left standing in that barangay. They were mainly lower class in the lower sector of the fisher folk sector, or the lower strata of the fisher folk sector. They had 12 to 20 foot boats. In this consultation, 8 of the 24 fisher folk actually had no boat before Yolanda. They would just stand by the river and use the net. So that really shows their level within the fishing sector. They have 11 boats donated by, or promised to be donated by the Agustinian sisters with no nets. So we've committed to giving them 3 nets based on our funds. And we could give more if San Roque was also completely washed out. They were higher up within the fishing sector. They had 15 to 25 foot boats. Mostly all of them had engines on their boats. And so their losses were quantifiable to $25,000 to $50,000 per person, per family. In Santa Cruz, they were also washed out. They've received boats from Yellow Boats for Hope. Yes, it's my mom. From Yellow Boats for Hope has promised them 10 boats. They've already received 5. Marsman Dry Still and Agribusiness has promised them 34 boats. They've already received 7. This is the barangay that I was talking to you about, where you see this beach shore full of boats, but no possibility of going back to their sea and returning to their livelihood without nets. We promised them 5 nets. And we can promise them more. And this is
So say again how much each net costs in US dollars?
4,085. So it's $200, a little over $200.
Per net?
It's a set of 3 nets that they use, and it's 300 meters per set of nets. So it's not just like one hand net. It's the nets for the boat. Yeah. Auntie Cindy has
And that's the $200?
So we figured to equip a wooden boat with a boat, a net, and the paint, which will preserve, has to waterproof and preserve the boat, is about $400, and transportation to get the boat.
What about the engines?
No engines. The engines are very, very expensive.
Oh.
So, and then the fiberglass boats, which would last, the wooden boats last about 6-7 years?
5 to 7 years, and the fiberglass boats last 15 to 20 years.
But those are bigger but more expensive, would be $800 per boat for fiberglass.
And they use them for the shallower parts, so that's why they don't have engines.
Oh,
They
if
don't
you
go
have
to
a
the really
40-footer
deep
boat,
water.
that's when you have an engine. I mean, of course, they could benefit from an engine, but a 40-footer boat, you need an engine. A 15 to 20-foot boat, you don't need an engine. This is in Cabuena, similar names.
I thought that I read that somehow the International Monetary Fund or the bank, the big bank that, has all this under them, all the banks was going to send money to the Philippines and give loans to those that needs them. That's how I thought. International big money.
Yeah, I haven't heard.
Yeah.
I'll look into that and see. I haven't heard too much about that.
Because Dalia Borromeo just came back from Estancia, from Iloilo, and this in Switzerland was there that provided them the help. And they did some help with the roofing, $50,000
Right.
to start, just to have the roof, and then they can fix the house.
Right.
And then at the same time, they also provided money for the boats, so they can have their livelihood. And then they were giving loans, I think, to some of them that needed loans. So she said that they were well set in them already because the whole Estancia was really flooded.
Right.
And they could build close to the shore now, so they are going back and they're buying lands. The government, somebody
Same
is
as
funding them
Same
to
with
start their lives, livelihood.
I think what you're saying is true, like the relief and rehabilitation really is coming to Tanauan, but as you can see, the devastation of Yolanda is so intense that even with all of these boats coming in from all, there's still so many fisher folk without boats, or so many fisher folk with boats and no nets who can't return to their livelihood. So it's the relief and the rehabilitation is coming, Tita, from other organizations that are there, but it's really, there needs to be more consistently coming, and it's not enough
They
to
say
meet the
it's
need.
more like the European countries are the ones that are really
Oh,
giving.
yeah, it's
And
not
you
the
know-
US, huh?
US
The US
Yeah, the
there. The US there.
Yeah.
But it's uneven. It's uneven. So originally, Tanauan was not getting hardly any
Yeah.
relief funds.
Yeah.
And so it also, I think, would probably depend on your political leverage, who your connections are. But I think what's different about what Isa is saying, the work that they're doing, her and Jolene are doing in the Philippines, in Tanauan, is that they are actually going to the people and saying, how do you want to organize this? What are your needs? Rather than just going, another organization coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do, without the consultations of the community and empowering the community to speak for themselves.
Were there co-ops among the fishermen? For instance, if they could get a wooden boat for $200, but it doesn't last as long and it takes so much maintenance. But if four of them, let's say, if four of them could have gotten a wooden boat, or they could do a co-op with a fiberglass boat, it will last twice as long. They might have to take turns taking it out. Are there any kind of that kind of a business model?
This is something that my mom's actually on the ground trying to create, fisher folk associations and co-ops. So it'll go into, so the wooden boats that we donated are being shared between two people, and there's like a bayanihan approach that I'll go into, and then there's the hard plastic boats, which are owned by the barangay government but are given to the care of the people, and then if you stop using it, you give it back to the barangay government. The Fisher Folk Association will vote on who in the town needs the next boat, and then there's also processes of other folks, because my mom was really trying to, and I say my mom because this is really her project, what my mom is really trying to focus on with this project is understanding that this Yolanda did happen, and you can't just expect a boat to come just for you. There's not enough resources for everyone to have a boat, and until everyone does have a boat, you have to find a way to work together and to create associations to advocate for what your community needs. So, yeah. So there's 3 types of boats that we're doing: hard plastic, wood, and fiberglass. This is the hard plastic boats. They were meant for immediate relief to reclaim livelihood. They're only 8.5 feet by 3 feet. They're really only, you can't go into the ocean for them. They're for the sabang, which is where the river meets the sea. They're for shellfish, fishing for shellfish, and they're also for checking on, and they're also for maintaining the mangroves replanting project in Cabuina and in Santa Cruz. So we distributed 20 of these, and there were contracts signed about what I was talking about, that they're owned by the barangay government. For 2 folks, they were actually using refrigerators before that. So, like, I don't know if you guys have seen pictures. I saw it on Facebook that it went viral. But those are folks from Tanauan. They took off the door of the refrigerator and were using the refrigerator as their boat. So this was an immediate replacement for those things. And we'll be giving we'll be giving nets to them. Only 12 of them needed it, because if you're doing the shellfish, you don't need a net for that. You have a cage. The lower income, the lower strata of the fisher folk sector, who before had only 14-footer boats. This is who we're trying to target for the wooden boat project. They cost 6,000 pesos. And so this is part of a bayanihan effort. Bayanihan means like working together. I mean, I'm sure someone's Tagalog is much better than mine.
Working together.
Yeah, working together. So there's a bayanihan
Building
effort.
community together.
Nice, thank you. Building community together. So there's a bayanihan effort where we purchased all of the paint and all of these things, and the boat was completed, but we had them put the paint on in groups of 2, and they're going to be sharing this wooden.
It will be waterproof.
Yeah, because they have to put the epoxy paint on it to finish. The paint isn't for decoration; it's really to make it waterproof. Yeah. So the bayanihan style workshop was intended to provide opportunities for the fisher folk to work with each other and to consider cooperative partnerships like you were asking about, and sharing limited resources until more boat donations come in, and also explore forming fisher folk associations. So they're there painting. This is the fiberglass boat. It was introduced, yeah, that's our family house behind there in Tanauan. This was introduced as an environmentally friendly alternative to wood. Not only is cutting down trees because when you have unaya, or the keel of the boat, it's one entire tree that it takes, because you can't use different parts of the boat. You have to literally cut down the entire tree and use that as the entire keel. So not only is that bad for the environment, but also after Yolanda cut down all of our trees, Yolanda chopped down all of our trees, so there's a very limited resource of wood, of trees available. So we introduced it, and we're trying to introduce them to the fisher folk, a concern for environmental sustainability, that fishing livelihood must lessen, if not eliminate, the detrimental impact it may have on the environment through cutting of trees for the boat's keel, or also illegal sized nets being used that actually that damages the very supply of fish that these people are dependent on as fisher folk. So as you can see, it's a lot more expensive. It's 23,000 pesos versus 6,000 pesos for the wooden boats. But as Auntie Cindy was pointing out earlier, the wooden boats are supposed to last 5 to 7 years. This would last 15 to 20 years without much maintenance needed. Yeah, and also this is a project that's partially being funded by SEIU, but if you give money, you can also donate more boats. But we're also doing a workshop where the fiberglass boat maker is going to Tanauan to build the boats there, so that people can see how the fiberglass boats are made. It can be a livelihood project so that they can begin making fiberglass boats, and also they can see how to rebuild and how to repair and maintain their boats from this person. It receives a lot of hesitance at first, because Tanauan really does not know anything about fiberglass boats. They were afraid that it wouldn't float or something. So they asked us to bring that to a sample, and they were really like, we don't want the fiberglass boats, but you can bring in a sample. So we brought in a sample and everybody wanted it. So now we're going to be ordering at least 14 more. But you can sponsor one if you like.
You have your name on the side.
So that's what, $600 more or less.
That fiberglass.
The fiberglass, right?
$800 with the tent and the paint.
Oh, with the paint and everything.
Transportation.
And the paint. Plus 8,500 for net, plus 4,000.
Is it 2 or that was 4?
So we're also trying to develop capacity with this project, not only introducing environmentally sustainable fishing practices, but also doing other projects, establishing a dialogue between DE&R, which is the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources, and the boat makers in San Miguel, who right now DE&R is taking a more punishment type of approach. If you're caught building a tree without the correct permit, then you'll be given a ridiculous fine or put in prison or put in jail. And so instead of doing that, we're organizing with Akbayan to try to make it a more educational approach, and also understanding that after Yolanda, it takes a day to walk from where they are in San Miguel to the DE&R office to get that permit, and then a day to walk back. So it's really unrealistic. So trying to promote environmentally sustainable activities while also being realistic on the ground level. And then establishing and strengthening fisher folk associations so that to ensure government agencies' efforts are aware of the needs of Tanauan fisher folk. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then moving forward, I'm sorry, this is taking so much longer than I promised you. Just moving forward, I think that what I really want folks to get from this is a long-term commitment. I was there for 4 months in the Philippines, and still it looks like the typhoon just left. Still, folks are really dependent on relief goods, not because we're lazy, like, a lot of the media is portraying that, they've been talking about stopping relief goods at the end of March, and I know that it's been causing a lot of chaos and a lot of fear in the folks who are very much dependent on the relief goods, not because they want to be, but because all of our livelihood was stripped from us when Yolanda came. And so it really is a long-term commitment, and also the role of the Filipino community abroad in advocating that relief and rehabilitation keeps on coming, and that it's not just a doling out and distributing of relief goods, but really an empowering of the community and involving the community in the work that you're doing, asking them, what do you need, what changes needs to be made, so that we're not just building back to what it was, but we're building back better, and we're making, we're making changes to the problems in the system. That's probably all.
I have one more question. Would it be cheaper for the tourist owner or to go to Tanauan instead of the teachers from Tanauan going?
Oh, for the teaching program?
It would be cheaper for the to go to Tanauan and have more teachers.
Instead of the other way around, yeah. It's programs that they already have. It's programs at schools, like St. Scholastica College is doing one, and then UT is doing another one. So it's college programs, and then they put you up, and then it would be cheaper, but I don't know how many people, if they would actually agree to go into Tanauan too. But that's definitely something that I should look into. They had missions that they were doing where they sent folks, to the places, but it was largely to do activities with the students, not with the teachers.
There's no, in Tanauan, there's no Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah. There's no internet or electricity in Tanauan.
Oh, there's nothing.
There is, but it's,
No generators.
But there's no internet. Yeah, there's no towers.
I have a question. Prior to Yolanda getting there, what was the government doing to warn people to basically get away from those coastal areas? I mean, Yolanda, it took a lot of some bucks, maybe 4 or 5 days before they knew for sure it was going to be hit. So, a lot of those people, I know that were killed around the coastal areas. What did they do to get everybody, try to get evacuate or move inland? Was there anything?
I think that one of the very sensitive subjects that my mom has talked about is that the news did say that there was going to be a storm surge, but I don't think that storm surge was adequately explained. I didn't even know what a storm surge was. My mom had told me there's going to be a storm surge. I didn't look it up on Google and see what a storm surge is. Typhoons are so common in Tanauan, we get around 20 every year, that it's like, okay, there's going to be a strong storm, we know how to deal with this. So some people actually went to stronger homes closer to the coastal barangays, thinking that because it's stronger, it'll hold up in the wind, but then what killed them was the storm surge. So I think there was a warning for folks to evacuate. It wasn't very specific. It didn't talk about what a storm surge was. A lot of folks were saying that I would have left and they called it a tsunami. But it wasn't a tsunami. But that's how we see it. Everyone after Yolanda thought it was a tsunami that hit them. So there was some evacuations that happened. I don't think that it was up to par for what was needed. There were some people in Palo that got left behind, which is the neighboring municipality. The trucks didn't have time to go back, so 90% of the people that were there died. So there's circumstances like that. So efforts were made, but it wasn't enough. And I also don't think that anyone knew that Typhoon Yolanda would be what it was.
They had tsunami warnings, or it didn't go out on time?
Lifesaver.
They were supposed to have had some tsunami warnings earlier, but they said that we're not working, or are there no tsunami warnings?
In Tanauan, I've never heard of tsunami warnings.
Yeah, because at one point they said that they had tsunami warnings, but it was already too late and they weren't working effectively.
I'm not sure about that. Sorry. I can ask my mom.
What's the Filipino government doing as well for you guys?
That's well for us?
What are they doing as well for you? What is the Filipino government doing?
Well for you.
Also, what are they doing?
What are they doing?
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's DSWD has, Department of Social Welfare and Development has regular distribution distribution of rice through they're partnering with the World Food Program. They're also purchasing land for the relocation program, for the permanent relocation housing. That's through the municipal government. I will say that our mayor was very effective after Yolanda and actually coming out and talking to the people. And actually after Yolanda, people started crying. It's coming again because you could see the sea because all the buildings were flooded. We've never been able to see the sea that far. So people were saying another tsunami is coming, another tsunami is coming. And he went out and talked to people. This wasn't a tsunami, that was a storm surge. It's completely different. And don't run because people were running to the hills when they heard that. So he was very active, whereas like Mayor Ramones of Tacloban City, who helicoptered out the day of Tanauan stayed in Cebu, which is a faraway municipality, stayed there for 2 days and then came back and gave an order to shoot on site looters who were looting Robinson's Market, the supermarkets for food, and 4 people died from that. So it's a very, he's also part of the political amnesties that I was talking about.